Welcome to Aflame for Christ, homilies to set your heart on fire with love for Jesus Christ. My name is Father Joseph Gill, a priest of the Diocese of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and you've joined us on this 19th Sunday of Ordinary Time. In the last century, a woman once wrote these words to her spiritual advisor. In my soul, I feel just that terrible pain of loss, of God not wanting me, of God not being God, of God not really existing. Who was this woman? Was she an unbeliever? A skeptic? No. It was Mother Teresa, perhaps the holiest woman of the 20th century. And when these words to her spiritual director were published after her death, many people came forward and said, look, she was a hypocrite. She didn't even believe in God. But actually, on the contrary, it showed the depths of her holiness because she continued to love and believe in God with the darkest, coldest, most raw faith. You know, there are times in our spiritual lives where we feel close to God. Maybe it's the birth of our child, or being before a beautiful work of art, or a peace we feel in adoration, or the beauty of nature, right? Or simply just an experience in prayer where we feel His love. And spiritual writers call this consolation, the feeling of God's presence. I hope that you have all experienced consolation in your spiritual lives. They're favors from the goodness of God. But most of us don't live our lives in consolation. Rather, spiritual writers such as St. Ignatius of Loyola speak about desolation as well. That feeling of being distant from God, empty, bored, lacking motivation to pray. Right? Have you ever felt that as well? I certainly have. And it's not a bad thing at all. But we have to understand how to keep our faith in desolation. I think Elijah certainly faced this in our first reading. We have to understand the context of this small passage. So Elijah was the only prophet faithful to the Lord in all of Israel when most of the nation had begun to worship the false god of Baal. The evil king threatened to kill Elijah for being faithful, so Elijah fled to Mount Sinai, the very place where the covenant of Israel had been established that they had been violating. But Elijah was in dire straits. Like right before this scene, Elijah actually prays for death. And he says, Lord, I'm alone. I'm being hunted down, and no one's converting my preaching, so please take my life. God tells him to go up to Mount Sinai, which is also known as Mount Horeb, which we hear in today's reading, and wait for the Lord to show up. And He does show up, but in a tiny whispering sound. And right after this passage, God basically says, Elijah, get back to work. Right? It must have been disappointing for Elijah. He probably wanted some consolation, something to make himself feel better. Maybe God could have showed up in the fire or the earthquake to show the prophet He was with him. But God didn't do that. He showed up in silence, didn't console him, and told him to be faithful to his task. And that's often how God works, right? We turn to Him for comfort, but sometimes feel only emptiness. We want relief from our difficult task of caring for our kids or our parents, but it seems like the burdens keep piling up. We find it a struggle to pray. It's like we're just going through the motions. Have you ever had that happen to you? Just that feeling of desolation, being like, God, where are you? I need you right now, and you seem to be silent and absent. But is He actually absent in times of desolation? No, not at all. He allows it so that we grow in holiness, in perseverance, and in humility. Because God doesn't want us to seek just good feelings or comfort. God wants us to seek Him. My friends, faith is not feelings. Even if you don't feel close to God, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that God has abandoned you. Rather, by choosing to remain faithful to Him, it purifies and strengthens our faith. It becomes something that we choose. Likewise, when we don't want to pray, but we do it anyway, it makes our love costly and real. You know, a true friend of Christ is friends with Him when He gives consolation, but is no less faithful when he chooses to hide himself. You know, no saint is ever made without desolation. Listen to the words of St. Faustina, the holy nun who had those visions of divine mercy. She writes this, she said, "A darkness began to invade my soul, growing thicker and thicker. I found no consolation in prayer. Often during the entire Mass, I did nothing but struggle with distractions." Was this a lack of faith? No. It was an opportunity to purify and strengthen her love for Christ, because she had to love Him without receiving anything in return. And so when we're in these times of desolation, we have to do like Peter did. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus Christ. There was a very wonderful holy priest from Naples who was a contemporary with St. Padre Pio. His name was Servant of God, Father Dolindo Rutolo. And he wrote a famous novena. A novena is a 9-day series of prayers called the Surrender Novena. And the core of this novena is this short prayer: Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care of everything. It sums up that perfect attitude in times of desolation, just complete trust and surrender. And Father Delindo had to live out that trust. He wrote several books that his superiors criticized unjustly, and for decades they forbade him from writing and preaching. He was misunderstood. He was in a lot of pain, crippled with arthritis and a stroke, and it would have been natural for him to ask God for consolation, for a sense of his presence, for a sense of his love. But he continually surrendered everything to God, even a natural desire for God's consolation. And that complete surrender made his good friend St. Padre Pio say, the whole of paradise is in that priest's soul. So there's going to be times that we're tempted to say in the midst of the storm, Lord, are you with me or not? And that's the time that we have to walk in blind trust, because our faith is not the same as feelings. God often hides himself so that we seek him with greater fervor, whether we feel close to him or not. So keep your eyes fixed on Christ like Peter did, choosing to stay faithful, even if your prayer life seems boring, dull, you're struggling, and even when it seems like your motivation is lost. Because the darker your spiritual life seems here, the brighter will be the vision of God for all eternity.